Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Really appreciate it in the warm weather. I know you'd much prefer to be in the garden or having a beer. So, yeah, really appreciate if you've joined us today. And today we're talking about relationships. So, some of you might have seen me before. I'm Dr. Michelle Hutchison, and I'm a consultant in old age psychiatry. And today I also have a colleague with me who will be talking about relationships and therapy based on that. So, sorry, I'll let you introduce yourself.
My name is Fatma, and I am a therapist. I was initially trained as an individual therapist, but my work's pivoted more towards couples therapy over the years. So, in today's webinar, we'll just be talking about couples therapy, what it looks like, what it can offer, and how to know if it might benefit you in your relationship. So, we're hoping to cover that today.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to be honest, Fatima, because I don't know an awful lot about couples therapy. And actually, I should, because in my work, actually, it's amazing how much marital difficulty or relationship difficulties I see in my work with older adults. So I'm surprised, really, that I don't know more about it, and it's something I need to learn more about. But can you tell me a little bit, maybe, about what circumstances people come to you? How do people reach out to you?
So, Michelle, that's a really great question, and I think it really varies. Sometimes people will make contact because they are in crisis, and a lot of times that is the point at which couples will say, "Okay, now we need somebody else to help us through whatever we're navigating." That's usually when communication, for example, is broken down. A lot of times, people will say to me, "It's like we're speaking different languages," or I feel like every time I talk to my partner, I can't get across to them. So sometimes communication will break down, and that'll be the thing that prompts people to seek help. Other times it'll be life transitions, so becoming empty nesters, for example, or having a child, so entering parenthood, navigating a chronic illness. If one partner, for example, has been diagnosed with an illness, what's the impact of that on the relationship and how do they support each other through it? Sometimes it can be things like fertility treatment, for example. So it's not necessarily something's gone wrong within the relationship, but the couple's navigating a difficult process that they want to be there for each other during, and they want to know how they can do that. Um, Other times it's, there's been a breakdown of trust. So there's been an affair, for example, or there's been some sort of financial information that's been withheld that's impacted trust. The trust is broken down. And that's when people will come into therapy. But more and more over the last couple of years, I would say there's been a change and a trend where people will come in and say, we think we're doing pretty great, as a couple, but here's something we'd like to be better at. So relationship maintenance. Things don't need to be, there doesn't need to be a crisis for people to enter into therapy. A lot of times it's, maybe we could be better and maybe we could do things differently than we are. So that happens a lot.
Okay, because that's something I was interested in. Because I think as psychiatrists, I see people when there's a crisis, but often there's been a huge build up over years, isn't it, to get to that point? Even when there's relationship difficulties. So that was interesting you said that, because my initial thought it would be people come to see the crisis, but actually you're saying that people often come to see us when actually it's not at that point, but they feel that there's some way they can improve either their relationship or a way that they're communicating with each other or negotiating a difficult time in life. That's really interesting to me, and I think we need to be maybe thinking more proactively actually in terms of that. And so that happens quite a lot, that people see you. I mean, sorry, day to day, do you tend to find that people are very good at coming before then when there's minor difficulties, or do you often see people maybe a bit later on when it's been going on for years and then it's more of a, as I said, more of an urgency or a crisis?
I would say more often than not, it's when there is a crisis and things have been building up over years. But more recently, like I said, over the last few years, there has been more of a trend, and sort of people will make contact when they're about to get married, for example, or they've just entered a new relationship and they want to sort of future proof the relationship and figure out ways to be together that are healthier. Or sometimes they'll say, I've done individual therapy and I don't want to enter into a relationship that's like that's like my parents, but I don't have a template how to do it differently. So what can we do so we don't, have a relationship like the ones that we saw growing up, for example? But to answer your question, I think crisis is more often than not the thing that drives people to make contact. But like you said, it's the crisis is just the straw that broke the camel's back. It's usually something that's been building up for 5 or 6 years, for example. So communication doesn't ordinarily break down overnight. It's something that's happened over a course of years, but it gets to a point where it really sort of breaks down completely, and that's when people will get in touch.
Yeah, so I think that I said resonates with me as a psychiatrist because I can see people that maybe have been married for a very long time, um, maybe happily or not happily, actually, in a lot of circumstances, maybe not happily for 50 years. It always surprises me. But normally the trigger point is something's happened. So we touched upon chronic illness. I see people who have dementia, or mental health problem, and then whatever issues may have been going on in their marriage, but they've somehow managed to, I should say, relationships, have been able to maybe get along with each other, that it's escalated really when something changes.
Absolutely, yeah. Life transitions have a way of doing that, and a lot of times, actually, interestingly, I see people who are navigating bereavements, for example. So maybe one partner has lost a parent or a sibling, and they're really struggling, and they want more support from their partner, but their partner really doesn't know how to support them. Or the bereavement, sort of like you said, caused for things that have been latent for a while to come to the surface, where they're like, I don't have capacity to continue pretending things are okay, for example, anymore. And that's what will drive them into therapy.
And can I ask you a bit about what actually goes on, Fatima? Because, in all honesty, I'm not. I often say to people, "Would you think that some relational therapy would help, or relate?" But I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not quite sure what that actually entails. I think it would be really helpful for me and maybe for the audience to talk about the actual process. So, for example, um, how can people be referred to you or make contact?
Yes. So that's a good question. I think a lot of times the thing that holds people back from making contact or is just how intimidating the whole process can seem. So first, in the way that I practice and the way that I set this up is I offer an initial consultation, which is it's an opportunity to meet and discuss what the couple's looking for, what I can do or cannot do to support them. And it's also a really great opportunity for them to ask me questions about the process. How long will this take? What can you help us with? What can you not help us with? And it's an opportunity for me to kind of manage expectations. And a lot of times people will come into couples therapy and say, if my partner can just change this one thing about themselves, things will be okay. And that's a good opportunity for me to tell them that's not really what this process might look like. We're really going to just focus on trying to understand what's happening between the two of you and what role each of you is playing in it. But I think the thing that intimidates people the most is they worry that a couples therapy can be a place where one person's going to be blamed or to be told that, you're the problem. And it's really not like that at all. And my job is not to say who is right and who is wrong. That's not my job at all. It's just to shine a light on what's happening between two people. So if people come in and say communication's broken down, but we don't understand why or how, my job might be to say, well, this is what I'm picking up. Could it be that this is the way you're responding to your partner and it's making them feel this as a response, and therefore, communication's breaking down. So that's really important. So we start with an initial consultation, which is what you don't have to commit to the whole process. That's a good opportunity to just meet with me and ask me questions about the process. And then for the duration of the therapy, we say the relationship is the client, but I do sometimes offer individual appointments to people? That's usually a question that I get a lot.
Yeah,
Of do
so
you
I have to say that's exactly what was on my mind, because it's tricky because, as you said, it's about trying to understand each other. It's not about pointing blame or whatever. It's about trying to gain understanding, isn't it, of each other's perspectives. So I did wonder, you do see people on their own as well?
So the way that I do it is I try and offer that at the beginning,
Yeah.
one individual session per person. And I do that because sometimes it's easier for people to individually tell me, this is what I think is going on, this is what would help me. And my role in that session can be, okay, how do I support you to bring this into our couples work together? So that's what I typically offer. Some couples choose to take that, others don't want to meet individually, and that's fine too. It really varies from couple to couple. And then at a later point, if I feel like it's therapeutically relevant, I will make that offer. But because I want to ensure that both partners are sort of given the same opportunities, if I offer one partner an individual appointment, I'll ensure that I'm offering the other one an individual appointment also. So that's what it typically looks like. And then depending on what they've brought, the process can, some couples see a shift between 8 to 12 sessions. For other people, depending on how entrenched their patterns are, it might take a little bit longer to see change. But the only thing I ask of my clients is just, commitment to the process. That's all.
And that brings me to another question in my mind, because I mean, with any type of therapy, even if it's an informal therapy in clinic, I often see that someone is keener or more engaged or more, they're buying into the process more than someone else. Is there a way, when you think that there's a difference in terms of someone's level of engagement or maybe reluctance on someone's part, is that something you can still work with?
Absolutely. So there's always going to be one partner who's more motivated to come to couples therapy, and the other partner they've convinced to sort of attend. And skepticism is welcome and allowed, and that it's okay to question the process, to question what you can gain from it, what the limitations of it might be. The only thing I ask is people commit to showing up and engaging in the process. One partner might be more motivated to do that, the other one might be a little bit less, but a baseline level of commitment to the process is really important, because that's how change happens. I don't think I can force people, or anybody can force people to make change. So that's kind of a baseline requirement for the therapy.
Yeah. It's really tricky, but I suppose we're all used to working with resistance in some way. So I think it's something you have to acknowledge and work with.
Absolutely.
And sorry, something else you touched upon was, well, I suppose people might probably wondering about the actual kind of practical aspects, because as you said, it's a commitment, isn't it? It's a time commitment, it's a money commitment, it's an emotional commitment.
It is.
So roughly, so I'm just trying to get a sense of how frequently do you normally see people? Is there, I know it's probably how long is a piece of string, but normally how many times do you see people, the numbers of sessions? Sorry.
Ideally, one things go, we might mutually decide, okay, let's move to a fortnightly arrangement now, because we're entering sort of the maintenance phase of therapy now. Or you can come see me once a month. But my recommendation is always to start once a week for a few weeks. At least a 6-week commitment is what I ask clients to hold in mind. So that really, it takes about 6 weeks just to understand the process, if I'm honest, and for people to see what they can take from it, because the first couple of sessions are usually just about bringing me up to speed on how they met, what went wrong, what they'd like to do differently. So there's a lot of information the first few sessions, but the work really sort of starts a little bit into three sessions in, I would say, is when we start working on things.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, isn't it? I said with any therapeutic relationship or in types of therapy, isn't it? It's longer bit is normally getting to know people and what the expectations are, and all that information gathering. And so once you've done that bit, which is maybe about 3 sessions, and you maybe go on to the more therapeutic side of it, what does that actually entail? Because I don't know, I maybe have expectations of, maybe from my training that people might be given, reflective homework, or I'm trying to think, maybe logs about what their behaviours or faults are and how they can change them. But that's probably maybe more of a CBT kind of concept. But is that similar to relationship
So
therapy?
it really varies from couple to couple and what they're bringing, of course. And some couples respond a lot better to sort of worksheets and exercises than other couples. So I do offer those. There are things like communication exercises that we can, skills training, for example, that we can practice in session, and then people can go away and practice that on their own. There might be exercises like communication wheels, for example, or an exercise for caring behaviors or love languages or things like that that they can practice. Some people respond really well to that. But what does commitment to the process look like? It doesn't necessarily need to look like, oh, you need to ensure you've completed this worksheet this week. Commitment to the process and is about being able to reflect on your own role in the dynamic. And take accountability for your role in the dynamic, I would say. So one thing I tell my clients all the time is you're 100% responsible for your 50% in the relationship. So I find when couples are able to do that and say, okay, I think this is the role I'm playing, that's when we see change the fastest. And that's how therapy moves really quickly then. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your
Yeah, no,
question.
yeah, I think it's helping me to understand. I said, because out of all the therapeutic processes, I think I've probably had the least amount of contact with this type of therapy. But actually, as I said, day to day, I see lots of people who I would say actually need this type of therapy, and it's something I commonly recommend without having maybe much experience of it. So I think it's really helpful to know a little bit about
like I said,
it.
I trained initially as an individual therapist, and I practiced as an individual therapist for many years. But I just dabbled into couples therapy out of interest, and it really caught my attention because what I realized was change happens a lot faster when you're working with two people. The family system, the home environment, all of those things change much quicker when both people are in the room, as opposed to working with an individual who's then going off and doing the work with their partner outside of therapy. So for me, one of the greatest appeals of couples work is that how fast change can sort of come about when both people are willing to work on themselves and the relationship, and just the ripple effect of it is something that I think makes a massive difference to people's lives.
When I think how many other aspects of life that relationships interact with, the fact that people often come and see us for mental health problems, and it's related to having difficulties with other people and in a relationship, and maybe that's gone on for a long time. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that how much that could actually benefit people, just trying to improve their relationships and improve communication with people is really important. And probably, I think, psychiatry, we're particularly not very good at this, at seeing people as a whole, not just the individual with a diagnosis, actually what's going on around that person, what are the things that are perpetuating it, what are the things that are keeping this person unwell. So I think, something I need to definitely, keep hold of and be more aware of, actually, how much it is impacting on every aspect of someone's life when they have, having difficulty relationships.
And also how much support you can tap into with relationships. If one person is struggling, there's a lot of support that can be tapped into by just bringing their partner into the therapeutic sort of equation. That's what I find.
And can I ask you, I think it's something we've maybe touched upon but not gone into detail about. People come in for particular reasons, or they want help with this, but from your experience, is there, I'm sure it varies widely why people come and see you, but is there a common difficulty or a cycle or pattern that people are experiencing that they want help with? Is there something that, as I said, is particularly common in your line of work?
That's a good question. And if I think about it, I think two distinct patterns come to mind. One of which would be sort of the pursuer-withdrawer dynamic, where one partner is seeking closeness, but the other one feels more and more withdrawn, and that distresses the first partner more, um, and leaves them feeling increasingly distressed. And so the distance between partners continues to grow, and it's a cycle people get trapped in all the time, where one partner wants to be closer, but the other partner is feeling uncomfortable about the closeness and pulling away, which is then very a lot. And I would say criticism and kind of this defensiveness pattern that shows up, where people, when there is sort of escalation or an argument, it becomes very much about, oh, you're always like this, or you've always done this, or you can never do this right. And instead of the argument, it becomes about criticism, which then leads to the other person feeling, the person who's being criticized feeling defensive. And actually the thing that's being discussed just gets lost somewhere, and communication breaks down. So we see both of those a lot in my work.
And sorry, someone's just asked a question. Would you, and maybe it might link in partly with what we've discussed, would you be happy to answer questions now, or would you prefer we answer at the end? Yeah. So someone's asked a very interesting question. Sorry, it caught my attention. I was distracted. Are there some relationships that can't or indeed should not be saved?
That's it. That's a good.
Who said that? It was very brave, whoever said that.
That's a very good and a philosophical question. And it depends on how somebody's trained and how they practice. But in the way that I sort of position myself as a therapist, it's not my decision to make what relationships need to end or continue. My role is to help people arrive at their decision in a way that feels well informed for them. So I would never say to a couple, oh, you should split, or I don't see this working out, or I would bring them to really think about, what do you need from this relationship, and do you think realistically your partner is able to provide that for you, or could you both get to a point where you could do that? So it's taken me a long time to kind of unlearn this idea that my role is to save relationships. Yeah. It's not. And the honest answer is, people come into couples therapy, and a lot of times they choose not to stay together. And that's usually, when that happens, it's the best outcome for them, because they've made an informed decision. They've evaluated what can be done, what cannot be done. They've had an opportunity to discuss how they can part ways, especially when there are children involved. So that's how I would respond to that. It's not my decision to make, but my job is to help people make that decision for themselves in a way that feels like they've really thought about it and they've considered all options. So yeah.
Because I was going to ask you about that. That's maybe a misconception, maybe that I had or other people have, that actually that is your role, really, to be almost like referee in the middle. Yes. So is that quite a common misconception? Okay.
It is, and I think a lot of people will come into therapy with this expectation of it's your responsibility to save our relationship, and from the very start of the process, I let them know that that's not necessarily. I mean, I'll try my best, and I'll try my best to help you understand what's going on. But if you think about it, I'm spending 1 hour of the entire week with them, right? So what they go off and do and what their relationship looks like, they have a lot more insight into that than I do. They live their lives, I don't. So they're the experts in their relationship, and I can help them by shining a light on what's happening. But most people I work with are responsible adults who are completely capable of making that decision for themselves, and I trust that.
And you're just helping them in that process, rather than being, as I said, being that referee in the middle.
Yes.
And I mean, so that's the misconception which came to my mind. But are there other common ones that you see in clinic?
Just the one I mentioned earlier, which is, I'm bringing my partner into therapy because they keep doing this, and I want you to tell them not to do it. Yes.
Yeah.
I want you to do. They need somebody else. They need a third person to tell them exactly what I'm telling them, but somebody in a position of authority and power, so they actually do what they. And I can't do that. I can't make people, change. But what I can help with is help the other partner see the impact of that on their partner. So when they repeatedly do that, or they ignore what their partner is asking of them, it makes the first partner feel a particular way. And that then has an impact on the relationship. So I can help them see that a little bit better.
Yeah, I just think I said a very important point, because again, it mirrors what I see in clinic, really, that people want you to tell someone off or make them believe something, and it's that's just not within our roles, is it? In mental health, that's not our role, to be doing that. But it's a very common one, I feel. It sounds like it's across all the specialities. That's a very common theme.
Yeah.
And so I've just got a question, if you don't mind. Someone's asked from the audience, which I think is quite a really good question, actually. So from your point of view, what are some signs that communication patterns may be harming a relationship?
So that's a good question. But if I were to put it very bluntly, I'd say only the people in the relationship can answer that question of what is harmful to them. But what I will say, some common themes that we see are criticism, contempt. That's another one that we see, where partners are contemptuous towards each other, where they might stonewall. So they're having an argument, but the silent treatment, for example, that's a really destructive pattern. So contempt, criticism, stonewalling, and defensiveness, I would say those are signs that communication pattern, that's harmful. And that's not me, that's Dr. John Gottman. That's what the Gottmans say, and they argue that actually, if these four things exist within a relationship, they can accurately predict how soon people will get divorced. So if they see couples communicating with contempt, with criticism, with defensiveness, and stonewalling, it's really bad for the relationship, and it will inevitably break down completely. So yeah, those are really harmful to a relationship.
Okay. Oh, I appreciated that. I mean, some of them seem like contempt, but stonewalling, which is, I think, actually very common, isn't it? But I wouldn't have associated it, I think, as strongly as some of the other ones that you mentioned. But yeah, it's very interesting. Then I wasn't
It's a
aware
very
of
common one,
that.
because I think the person who stonewalls thinks that they're de-escalating the situation by just withdrawing from that. But what they're actually doing is leaving whatever is brought up unresolved, and that's not great long term for any relationship.
And sorry, we've got another question as well. Uh, so, what have you learnt from others, and how do you incorporate this into your own relationships?
That's a good question. I think a lot. I've learned a lot, much to my partner's dismay. It's almost like I
Go check.
I have foresight. I can see, okay, we're doing this incorrectly, or if we don't work on this now, in 10 years this is going to be a big problem. So communication is something I've worked on a lot. Open and honest communication, and that's not something one person can do. Both people need to be really sort of keen to do it. So I'm really grateful to my partner that he is willing to do that. But that's not to say we don't have arguments, or communication doesn't break down when there are times of stress, and when life is happening, life transitions. Yeah, we struggle also. But I will say that training as a couples therapist has really helped my relationship. I hope we'll only know in a few years. 10 years from now, maybe I can answer that question better to see if things work.
And
Yes, that's right. Contempt is actually one of the strongest predictors of long-term relationship failure. Yeah, that's very true. And I think it's that element of anger and disgust. If you're constantly subjecting your partner to contempt, it's just really destructive. It is.
And yes, I think that, as I said, I've learned a lot just from that, really, just from those discussions, and maybe how I can incorporate that a little bit into my own practice day to day. Because I said it's very common, even in older adults. I see this every day. And I appreciate really that you're probably seeing people at the most vulnerable, the most difficult time in their life, and the relationship is one of the most, sometimes most private. I'm trying to think of the word. Experiences that someone's going through. Um, I'm just wondering that dealing with people on that intimate level, is there something, I know you obviously can't talk about particular examples, but is there something which has happened or something someone said to you which has kind of really resonated with you, kind of stuck with you throughout your therapy?
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I probably can't think of something that anybody said. But what I will say is, just watching people go through the process, for me, one of the things that really indicates change and makes me feel like I've done my job is when I can see people be playful with each other again, so they can laugh and they can joke in the therapeutic space. And for me, that's always really rewarding to watch. And feels like, okay, if people can access that part of their relationship, that doesn't mean everything's completely okay or they're not arguing or communication's perfect now. But if they can find that playful energy, and if they can kind of joke and make fun of each other and themselves, that feels like because I think that is an indication of safety and feeling safe within a relationship. And if we're able to restore that, that feels important and feels really rewarding as a therapist.
And actually, I think you've led on to another thought I had, and something I was going to raise was that obviously some types of therapy, it's quite easy to measure. Well, it's not ever particularly easy, but you can measure change. And I suppose that leads into my thought really that that's one way of measuring change, isn't it? If you see that relationship change and people are able to be, playful with each other.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how would you, from the patient's perspective or your perspective, how would you know that the relationship is changing, that there's been some progress?
So there are some tools that we can use. One of the tools that I use is called the Couple Satisfaction Index. So it's a tool that Tavistock's made, and they designed it for their couples therapy for depression model, which I'm trained in. So I use that a lot, and I ask people to fill that out at the start of therapy, and then I ask them to fill it out at the end, and we see if their scores have kind of changed. But really, it's a 32-item questionnaire where they talk about different aspects of their relationship, like, do I enjoy my partner's company, or if I could go back in time, would I choose this partner again? And we see if, sometimes some of those questions are really really intense and evocative. And when you're at the end of the process, people's responses to those change completely, and their overall score changes. So there's we can see how much distress a couple is in at the start and at the end using tools like that.
Okay, well, that's interesting, because I would have thought it would maybe been a measure of if there've been changes in someone's mental health, but I suppose that doesn't always. It probably is influenced by a relationship, but isn't always directly related.
Mental health is just such a difficult thing to measure, right? So it's I think people will come back and tell me, actually, we're arguing less, or we're arguing more. Sometimes people. So there was a question here about how many arguments.
We've had lots of very interesting
Are arguments normal? Yes, and I think arguments are really important because it indicates that you still care, right? I think it's a lot more dangerous when people are not arguing at all, because that indicates on some level there's hopelessness, and like it's futile to even get into an argument. To me, that's a lot more dangerous than being in an argument. So people will actually come back and say, we're doing this differently, or we were able to enjoy this time together, or we were able to come to a decision about something that hadn't felt like we could agree on. And so there will be other indications, but one of the sort of ways of doing it is the couple satisfaction index.
Okay. Interesting, and I'm glad this is taped that I can play that bit back to my husband. Arguments are healthy, but yeah, these are some. I appreciate this is a really big topic, where we're all probably very warm and very tired. And another, wow, gosh, these questions are really hard to answer. You're doing a really good job. The next question is, what role does emotional regulation play during disagreements?
A big one. And I would say that a big part of couples therapy is actually helping people um, emotionally regulate themselves better during conflict when they are feeling very dysregulated. And if not regulate themselves better, then help their partner see that this your partner is really dysregulated in this moment, and they may not be operating from a cognitive, rational, logical space, right? So this happens a lot where when somebody's dysregulated and they have a tendency to withdraw or just not engage in an argument, that can be very distressing for the other partner, and they can feel like, oh, this person just doesn't care about what I've just said. So it's really helpful to understand for both partners what happens when their partner is outside of their window of tolerance. What is the impact of that, just on a nervous level, as a nervous response. Yes, a lot of couples therapy is about, this is what happens when I get emotionally dysregulated. This is what it looks like. This is what I can do differently, or this is what my partner can do differently to help me stay a little bit regulated, or we can come up with a plan of, if I'm really dysregulated, there's no way I'm going to be able to have this conversation now, but let's come back to it 20 minutes from now, and that can be a plan we can put in place. So both partners feel like they have this, one partner can have the option to walk away for 20 minutes, regulate themselves a little bit, but the first partner still feels like what they've said isn't left hanging and there will be some sort of resolution. So we do that too.
Oh, that's really. And is that something, if someone needed it, you'd ask them to seek their own therapy if you felt there was, yeah, if they had their
Absolutely.
own mental health difficulties that was
Absolutely.
impacting on their emotional regulation?
Yeah, yeah. And in my experience, a lot of times when people have had individual therapy, and or in the past or it's ongoing, they can bring those insights and learnings into the couple space and apply them in a real life kind of way. So I find that quite valuable. People have different positions in that. Some couples therapists will not work with people if they're working with an individual therapist, but
Right.
I actually see a lot of benefit in the process. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm surprised because I can see a lot of what you've discussed is a lot of overlay, sorry, with other types of therapy. So you can see how, like with most types of therapy, that the techniques you use, there is some transition, isn't it? Some techniques you can take away and probably use for every type of therapy.
absolutely, yeah.
Sorry, I'm aware oh gosh, we've only got a minute left. It never lasts. I always think, how are we going to fill those 40 minutes? And it goes very quickly. And I think, oh, actually, we need another 40 minutes. Um, but maybe, are you happy to do one last
Yes,
question?
of course.
Okay. Which one do you fancy?
So we could do whatever you decide. We've got to do. I'll let you pick.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What should people do if they feel stuck in the same arguments or patterns repeatedly?
They should reflect on what's happening, because once you understand the pattern a little bit better, you can pay attention to, well, when do I start feeling this way? What is it that I do? What is it that my partner does? What do I experience them as? And so the more you sort of understand the pattern a little bit better, the more you can work with it. And of course, that's where couples therapy also comes in, where you can come to a couples therapist and ask them, what you could do differently. Or in some ways, couples therapy can also play the role of mediation sometimes. We can pause and understand what's happening and break that down in a way that may not feel safe, contained space. You can really pick that apart and see where the difficulty is and why do you feel stuck in that pattern, and what you could do differently. So that's what you can do. If we've got a minute, I would love to answer this other question, which is about what about the idea of a relationship with yourself? How does this
Oh,
impact
yes,
external
excellent
dynamics?
question.
That's a really good question. And I think it impacts the external dynamics significantly, because my core training is psychodynamic. I do understand the importance of early relationships, previous relationships, and I use that a lot in my practice. We may not talk about previous relationships, but the way people present in the present is always linked to historical things and their relationship with themselves. Some people might be hypersensitive to rejection, for example, or they might, want to go away and regulate themselves. And those patterns are formed early in life. So that relationship with the self really does impact how we are in relationships. I would say it's a core part of how we are. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
wanted to say that.
And that's, I think, again, really interesting, because in my experience, people often think, okay, things have happened to me throughout my life, and therefore that's me and it's not going to change. But actually, our thoughts and actions and behaviors, it's amazing how much they can change. It's
Yeah,
things are not, we are, our brains are very clever, we're very clever, and even if people feel stuck, in my experience, I can see people who can change patterns with the right therapy, among other things, in their 80s. It's not setting your future is not set in stone, is it? We get all capable of change, more than we give ourselves credit for.
for sure. For sure. I would agree with that.
So I think we're coming to a close, but I think what would be really helpful is that now that people know a little bit more about therapy, how would they, if they're interested maybe in therapy or discussing it further, how could they do that?
They can make contact with the Oxford Psychiatry Group on their website or their WhatsApp, and that's the place to get in touch with me.
Okay. All right. Well,
and this webinar will be available on the website, so they can watch that again.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us today. As I really appreciate everyone coming, despite the warm weather. I know I am absolutely melting after spending a day in unconditioned hospital. So I really appreciate everyone coming today, and Fatima for coming to share her knowledge. I've learned an awful lot today, and I hope everyone else has. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Michelle, for all your thoughtful questions. Lovely meeting all of you. All right.